Thank you, Lord, for what you've put on Rupert's heart. Thank you for how you speak through him. Thank you for who he is, how much you love him and love us. And I pray that we would all have our ears and hearts open to what you are speaking through him today. Bless him, fill him with your spirit. Amen.
Amen. Okay. And good morning, everyone. Good morning if you're joining us online or watching this on Catch Up. So glad that you can join us. We're in the middle of a series called Off the Map, thinking about how do we navigate change, particularly when it's change where we don't necessarily know the terrain or the map and we don't quite know where we are going to end up. We're living in time of great disruption, massive amount of change. I heard somebody say that they thought we'd had about 10 years of change in 12 months. And it was already changing quickly. I don't know about you, but I feel like, oh my word, you know, the world around is changing. And we are sensing as a church that for us to thrive, we need to adapt. We need to change because of the changing world that we're in, and that will be true for us as individuals as well. And so we've been thinking about navigating change. Right at the beginning, I set this series off thinking about Genesis 12, a story where God speaks to Abraham and says, go to the land that I will show you. So you're just to go, Abraham, and I will lead you on the journey, and I'll show you where the land is when you start walking. Like scary. What we realized was that Abraham's father had already done that. So it was in the spirit of what was already in the family, but to carry on exploring and moving forward in obedience to God. We've been thinking about how different things that can hold us back, how anxiety might stop us adapting and changing. We've been thinking about when things are all brilliant and fine. Naomi talked about Solomon, and again, how that might stop us change and moving forward. And then last time, Ashley looked at some excuses that may come up from the story of Moses, that again may stop us moving into the things that God has got for us. Today, we're going to be looking at a story of Jesus. It is something I've talked about before. It's just before Jesus starts going into what is famously known as the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 4, and then flipping over into the beginning of chapter 5. I'm sharing this because actually this vision has captured me, and I'll maybe explain a little bit more about that as we go on. But let's read the scriptures this morning. The reference will come up on a slide in a sec, but not the text. If you want to just listen, please listen. If you want to find it in your Bibles or on your phones or apps, you will find it in Matthew chapter 4 and verse 23. So Matthew chapter 4 and verse 23. Jesus went through Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness amongst the people. News about him spread all over Syria, and people brought to him all who were ill with various diseases, those suffering severe pain, the demon-possessed, those having seizures, and the paralyzed, and he healed them. Large crowds from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and the region across the Jordan followed him. And then into the first couple of verses of chapter 5. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. So the context of this story is Jesus had spent 40 days at the beginning of chapter 4 in the desert, prayer and fasting, this encounter with God, being tested. And in Luke's gospel, we read that Jesus comes out of those 40 days of prayer and seeking God, and he comes out full of the power of the Spirit. God's power rested on Jesus, and we start seeing at that point him engaging in his public ministry, his public leadership, and all kinds of amazing things start happening as Jesus starts teaching people and starts praying for people. So he's just come out of this testing full of the power of the Spirit, and God's power was flowing through him. And so we come to this end part of Matthew chapter 4, and it's an amazing story of Jesus proclaiming that the kingdom was here, that the presence of God, the kingdom of heaven, that heaven was breaking in to earth, that God's presence was suddenly available to all people. And as he started preaching those things, what happened was people with all kinds of sicknesses and illnesses started getting healed. And this amazing thing happens at this particular point. It's like Jesus suddenly becomes viral in 2,000 years ago. It wasn't on social media, but suddenly news spreads about Jesus all around the region. And there's this shift that begins to happen. Instead of Jesus going to people start coming to Jesus. These great crowds of people from all around the region start coming to Jesus. And particularly if they were ill, or they were sick, or they were in severe pain, or they were oppressed in some way by evil, and they were feeling bound up, and they started coming to Jesus, and they were getting free, they were getting healed, they were being set free of pain and all kinds of things like this. Amazing things happening. Now, if you've been around the church for any period of time, maybe you've dreamt of those kind of things happening. I know when I was a young Christian, I dreamt of that. And there were people, and I was one of them, that would read stories of revival when God kind of seems to break out and people come to faith and amazing miracles start happening. And this land, this nation of Scotland, has an incredible history of revivals. And I'd be like, oh, God, send revival I'd love to see it. And there are many people I know that still pray for that kind of revival. But what really strikes me, what's gripped me about this passage is, for many people, that's what we would love to see, and yet Jesus walks away. I wonder if you were one of his disciples at that point. He just called his disciples after this 40 days in the desert. He starts inviting people to come and be part of his team. He gathers his team around him, and then this kind of amazing stuff breaks out, and all these people are coming, and they're traveling many miles, probably many days, to come and see Jesus, and they're getting healed and set free, and their lives are being transformed. And you're part of Jesus' team thinking, whoa, this is amazing. I mean, it'd be amazing, wouldn't it? I'd be like, oh, Jesus, this is so exciting. This is amazing. I'm so pleased I'm part of your team. I'm so glad I'm not fishing in the sea anymore. I'm part of your team. And then Jesus says, no, right, guys, I'm off. I'd be like, having teenage kids, you learn all these things. It'd be facepalm moment. Like, what are you doing, Jesus? I mean, this is incredible. And you're just going to walk right away. Chapter 5, verse 1, Jesus saw the crowds and he went up on a mountain. And his team, it's only his team, his disciples went and followed him. The crowds didn't go, just Jesus and his team. Why would you do that, Jesus? Why would you leave that incredible place of blessing where thousands of people's lives are being changed? Why would you do that? So the number of times where Jesus leaves the crowds, all kinds of reasons that people sometimes come up with, all kinds of really good reasons. Like Jesus needed time alone. He needed time to refresh himself. He leaves the crowds at various points when he's fed a crowd of 5,000 people with just a few loaves and fishes, and he leaves the crowds and he goes up by a mountain to pray. And then he says to his disciples, you get the boat, you cross a lake, and then Jesus comes a bit later having prayed and he starts walking on water. There's a number of stories where Jesus leaves the crowds, and sometimes it seems like he just needs some space or some solitude. There's all kinds of helpful things reflecting around. It's not all about work. You need time off, or you need time to pray and refresh and all that kind of stuff. What I think grips me about this passage is I don't think that's what's going on here. So Jesus begins to teach his team, his disciples. And the next 3 chapters is what's called the Sermon on the Mount. And so often we read the Sermon on the Mount as in an individual way. This is how I am supposed to live as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus. This is what Jesus calls me to live, to represent him. But I don't think that's enough. I don't think that's what's really going on here. I think what Jesus has in mind when he starts talking about it is we miss that this isn't individual primarily. This is a group of people. He's dreaming of a group of people that follow him and live in light of the fact that the kingdom of heaven, that heaven is breaking into earth. He's dreaming of communities of faith, of followers of Jesus that come together and live in a way in light of this inbreaking spirit that we're celebrating today at Pentecost. I think Jesus sees that the impact that he can have in chapter 4 is to bless thousands of people. That's great news. But if he can inspire a bunch of people to create communities of followers of Jesus all around the world, all around the ages, that do that stuff, think about the impact of that. Whoa. We're part of something called the Scottish Network, and we're one of a number of kind of groups of churches in Scotland. Scottish Network, imaginative, but hey. And here's what we dream about. We dream about every community in Scotland having a community of Jesus people that are light and salt, or salt and light, to that community that they're planted in. We want everybody to be able to walk round to their local community of faith, of Jesus people, and find hope and healing and life and freedom and blessing. We're not interested in that all being Scottish Network churches. I don't care whether it's a Catholic church or a Church of Scotland or a Baptist church or a independent network church or a vineyard church. I don't care as long as they're Jesus people living out the vision that Jesus had of this is how you're to live in light of heaven that's come to earth, the Spirit that's come. But everybody, every single person in Scotland, every single community, having a community of Jesus people living around the corner that will help them have hope and life and healing and freedom. That's what we dream about. So the question we're asking ourselves is, where are the communities which don't have those kind of people? Where do we need to start helping churches form, or we can help churches transition so they are those kind of things? I think that's what Jesus was dreaming about. All around the world, at every age, every moment in time, there would be communities of Jesus people who were doing the kingdom stuff of bringing life and freedom and flourishing and blessing to the communities that they were planted in. I mean, amazing. That vision has gripped me, which is one of the reasons why I no longer talk about revival. But I talk about flourishing churches. I want to see flourishing churches in every single community. Around the world, actually. But hey, let's just start with Scotland, eh? I'm totally not going for my notes. So we're thinking about navigating change. Let me just check my time. I'm going to stop in a minute. This is my idea. Very simple. So we're thinking about navigating change, going off the map. Here's the idea. Sometimes we have to leave good things behind and let go of good things to take hold of better things. Impacting, long-lasting, rooted foundations. We're not looking for short-term, shiny blessing. We let go of good things. I would still love to be part of a revival. I'd love to see God doing amazing God things, right? I'd love that. But I'm more interested in seeing flourishing churches everywhere. Because flourishing churches will have long-lasting impacts. Sometimes we need to let go of good things to take hold of better things. As a church, we're thinking just at the moment about a priority of outward-looking focus beyond mission. We've got loads of amazing, brilliant things that happen in this community, but now is the moment where we sense God is calling us beyond. If you weren't here last Sunday and you didn't hear what I said, there's a video that's in our newsletter, that's on our YouTube channel. It'll be in our newsletter this Friday again. Please sign up, where I just take a few minutes at the end of Ashley's talk to explain this focus a little bit more, this priority of being outward focused, because Jesus goes on in this Sermon on the Mount where he dreams of these embassies, these colonies of heaven, if you like, that carry the culture of heaven and are an embassy in the world in which we live. When you have an embassy, when you have a British embassy in another country, it's under the rule of the British government. So Jesus dreams of these embassies of heaven, these colonies of heaven, of communities of Jesus people that live under the rule of heaven, that have the culture of heaven, and then they are ambassadors of that culture into the country that that embassy is in. So that's what we are. We are a colony of heaven. Whether you come from Scotland or England or Ireland or India or wherever else, that is not your primary identity. We're a colony of heaven. Our citizenship is in heaven, first and foremost. And we carry the culture of heaven that is meant to be, we're meant to be ambassadors of that culture into the communities that we are rooted in, around the King's Hall and wherever we live. That's what Jesus, I think, dreams about. And then he says you're to be salt and light, salt of the earth and light to the world. Salt, distinctive, light, visible. We're meant to be distinctive and visible. So this priority of mission is that Jesus is forming these colonies of heaven in light of the Spirit that has come, that we're celebrating today. We're meant to be distinctive and visible and ambassadors of the culture of heaven into the world and the places and the communities that we're planted in. Whether you live near the King's Hall or whether you're joining us from afar or whether you're in Bonnyrigg or wherever else you are, we're colonies of heaven living in light of that. That's why Jesus leaves this revival at the end of chapter 4, because he dreams of these communities all around the world, all through the ages. Right, I just want to say 3 things here and then I'm going to finish and we'll just open up for a little bit of feedback. I'm going to cut my notes in half just so we end up on time, because we've got a dedication coming up soon of Rosalie. So let me just say three things that we've said some of this before, but I just want to reiterate this. The first thing is, all change involves loss. All change involves loss, even good change. There's always loss. I first heard about this from a friend of mine who told a story of being the best man at a wedding, and he was sharing a room with the groom. And at 3 a.m, the groom was tossing and turning the night before the wedding, and harumphing and huffing and puffing and keeping my friend awake. And so my friend, rather grumpily at 3 a.m, said, "What's the matter?" And the groom said, "I think I might be making a mistake." And my friend said, so he does a bit of training for a living, and he's got a little diagram about gain and loss and, change. It's kind of change circle. And he said, "I got a napkin out, I drew this little diagram, I pointed at loss, and I said, you're not having second thoughts, this is where you're at. You're just recognizing that there are some things you're losing in the midst of something you really want. Now go to sleep." He said, "It wasn't my most empathetic moment, but I was right. Of course he wanted to marry this girl. She was amazing. Of course she did. Of course he did. But what he was experiencing at that moment in time is even in good change, there's always loss. Think about having a baby for a first time. Think about getting retired and suddenly, or retiring, and suddenly you've got a load of freedom and you can do whatever you like, but there's always loss attached to change. Loss of freedom, loss of connection, loss of identity, loss of place. You see, change is the thing that happens in the surface of our lives. We get married, we have a baby, we retire, we no longer have a job. Loss is always at the psychological, emotional level of our lives, and it happens whatever change there is. So the second idea that we've been saying over the last wee while, Naomi said it last week, or the week before, is that people don't tend to resist change, we tend to resist loss. It's at that emotional, psychological level in our lives where things are changing, that's what we tend to resist. And thirdly, I think you should have slides for these, Justin, these 3 points, so maybe you could just put them up. The third thing is, for us to navigate change well, we have to journey into the loss and through the loss. Let me just tell you a wee story, and then I'm just going to ask you to just a few minutes just where we can do some feedback. Most of you probably know that I am having a month of a mini sabbatical. Our practice is that we have a sabbatical for 3 months every 7 years. My last sabbatical was 2009. And so, 2016 should have been the year, but for one reason and another, it hasn't happened. It was meant to be 2020, and then 2020 happened. And so, as I've said before, Joy and Alan, in a kind of annual sit-down chat, said, look, it might not happen in 2021. And I was like, no, it will definitely happen in 2021. It'll definitely happen. This was last summer. And they said, well, okay, but if it doesn't happen, I think you should take a month anyway. And I was like, that would be amazing, but I'm going for 3 months, all right? So 2021 happens, and a month seems the right time. And it's an amazing privilege. I'm desperate, I feel the need of it. It's 12 years after the last one. I'm a great advocate for sabbaticals for anybody that's involved in leadership, caring, people, stuff, not only in church, but in other kind of contexts. And please hear me, it's an amazing privilege. And there is part of me that's longing and desperate for this because it's been so needed. People have said at various points, including Pippa this morning, saying, oh, you must be really pleased that you're stopping after today. And there's part of me that's going, yes, doing a 10-day silent retreat up on the Black Isle, blah, blah, blah. But there's another part of me that is resisting this. So I have said to a number of people, yes, I am, but I'm also feeling pulled in another direction. I have loved seeing people again. Restrictions are opening up just at a time when I'm going to hole myself up on a retreat centre with nobody there and not allowed to talk for 10 days. I was here to 3 last Sunday because I loved having so many conversations. There are a number of things that are happening, that we're developing and changing, and we're progressing in the church that I'm having to let go of. And so there's part of me that's longing for this space, and there's another part of me that is aware of the loss of doing that. So I am feeling pulled in different directions. And it's only a month. I know it's only a month. This is not a big change. It's just a month. But I feel that tension within inside me. And here's the deal. As I've named that, as I've named the tension and the loss and the things that I'm letting go of that are costing me in some respects that I would love to continue to do, actually it helps me let them go, to step into the thing, the deeper thing that I know is actually what I really need. The thing that God is really speaking to me about, and that I feel this deep sense of call to enter into silence for 10 days. Even though that's incredibly scary. Let me just put a little parenthesis around that. As an extrovert, 10 days of silence, my kids were saying, "You're doing what, Dad? 10 days of not talking to anybody? How do you do that? What happens if you want the milk?" So as we name the losses, as we acknowledge the things that we're letting go, sometimes really good things, it enables us to take hold of the better, long-lasting, impactful things that God is calling us to. So, let's just take 3 or 4 minutes with these questions. Justin, if we could have the next slide, please. Where have you experienced loss, even when the change was good? And what helped you navigate that change? Let's just pause in silence for a moment. You can use the chat board, or you can use Zoom, or there may be just space for a couple of people just to say something. Where have you experienced loss, even when the change was good? What helped you navigate that change? So just a bit of space now just to share something. Please put something in chat, use the chat board on the website, or come to the microphone here, or if you want to say something and you're on Zoom, please just ask Justin. Please leave a comment in the chat and we'll unmute you. Just for 3 or 4 minutes. Where have you experienced loss, even when that change was good? And what helped you navigate that change? Chris, has put down here, loss of connection with loved people because your worldviews are different. Yeah, it's painful. There's a loss there. Thank you, Chris. Kirsty.
Hi. Yeah, I think it's probably pretty obvious what my loss was, which moving here from Australia, lost my sense of community and family, and it was really, really hard, actually, and felt quite lost in that. And especially because I got here in the middle of winter, and I actually really didn't like Edinburgh to start with. It was dark, it was drab, it was old, it was the opposite of Sydney. So profound sense of loss. Also, obviously, I got to expose myself to the rest of the world, which was amazing. Travel, really exciting. But what actually helped me navigate through that was finding a sense of community. Before that, it was obviously Jesus. He was with me the whole time. And actually, I can't even talk about it because it just makes me super emotional that he was just there every step of the way. But also that sense of community, both at the college I work at, but also here, of course.
I think that's so interesting, isn't it? People might have thought, here's Kirsty going on this amazing journey in travel. Oh, you must be so excited. And yet actually, yes, there is that, but there is also, gosh, there's a lot that I'm losing here too. Thank you, Kirsty. And then finding that place of reconnection with something that you've lost. Finding your place again in a new community. Anyone else? What have we got here? A number of years ago, I was hurt by church and I left, says John Noble. At the time, the pain was extreme. I lent into God and was blessed by another church. Thanks, John, for sharing that. Often we have to go through the darkness to emerge out into a new place of connection, belonging, place. The loss of singing in worship, says Paul, and finding new ways to worship and experience God. Experience worship. And what helped was just listening. Thanks, Paul. The Tanzas. We had a similar experience as you, Kirsty, leaving Austria behind 4 years ago. Our family, friends, and jobs. What helped was knowing that we were called to this country and then finding connection in Scotland. And now we're at a point where this is home, not Austria. Wow, that's an amazing journey. Thank you. Tanzas, great that you can be at home here, and we love having you part of this family here. That leaving, that letting go may be geographical, like Kirsty and the Tanzas, but it could be just things. It doesn't have to be geographical. Rory, due to my headache and coronavirus, I've temporarily lost my independent life in Edinburgh. I know that through a program of work, craft, exercise, meditation, and medicines, I will be able to return to Edinburgh. Thanks, Rory. Huge amount of loss there and a number of ways in which, and I love some of the creativity, work and craft and exercise, medication and meditation that will help you re-engage with that again. Trish, let's take this as the last comment, I think.
Hi, I was just thinking how it's been for me, because I was living in England. I have all my family in England, and I've been very much part of church and involved in church and in ministry. And the Lord just said, it's time, I just want you to leave. And I've got one friend in Scotland, and she said to me, why didn't you come up to Scotland? And I go, yeah, okay. Prayed about it, and just God said, yes, I want you to sell up and I want you to go to Scotland, which is what I did. And I hadn't really considered the impact emotionally that was going to have on me, because everything I knew had suddenly just gone like that. And I felt very disconnected. I felt lost. I felt like a nomad. And all those familiarities had just disappeared. And it does actually make you feel quite derailed emotionally. I think for me, navigating through that, the Lord helped me to sit with my feelings and my emotions rather than be scared of them and try to busy myself, because with COVID, we didn't really have the same style of life where we could be busy. So there was a healing really in that, of just accepting, okay, you feel pretty rubbish and you feel sort of out of it, but just being accepting of one's feelings and just sit with yourself. God does quite a deep healing work in us, whereas when life is normal and we're doing X, Y, and Z and we're busy, often the Lord hasn't got that space with you to be able to deal with those deeper heart issues. So, and I think, it's 3 years now, in June I'll have been here. And it's only now that I've started to feel a bit more settled. So yeah, it just takes time and you have to be patient. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing that story. And I love that sense of just sitting with the loss, that emotional level. The change is the moving from England to Scotland. But it's the loss. We have to sit with that loss if we're going to journey well. A few other just comments on the website chat board. Dominic saying moving countries for relationships and jobs being further away from family and friends. Been a bit of a theme here. We've got a lot of people that have moved. I want to reiterate that change is not necessarily geographical. Change happens in all of our lives all the time. Hence my story of just a sabbatical. It's a small change for a month, but actually there's an emotional dynamic that's at work along with the change on the surface. Becky, starting a new job last summer in the middle of a pandemic. New relationships and a new role are hard enough to navigate without the added problem of last year. Things are improving though. Yes, absolutely. There's the letting go in the midst of a virtual world, although that may not be true for you, Becky, but letting go of old relationships with old colleagues and then entering into the new. The fear, says Tom, of losing personal time, sleep when having children, but a wise mentor reminded me of the joy that will come that would eclipse any of the sacrifices. Yes, so any change, there's going to be those positive joy, gain bits, but there's also the loss and the letting go. So the key thing out of this passage for us today is that sometimes God invites us to let go of the good things so that we can take hold of the better, long-lasting, impactful things. And that requires recognizing the loss that happens through change and journeying in and through that loss so that we journey well with the change that happens in the surface of our lives. David, I wonder if you could come and just lead us in some prayer. In the final song of worship. Let's just pray. Father, I thank you for the wisdom of your scriptures, the wisdom that we see in Jesus. Thank you that you are with us in times of disorientation, in times where things are just all up in the air and we can feel disconnected. We don't know our place. We lose a sense of identity. You journey with us, and I pray for each one of us as we journey through change in our individual lives, in our workplaces, in our families, in our communities, and in this church. I pray that you would journey with us through all of these things. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.